Kitsune Tails is a 2D platformer that features a story between three young women that are caught up in a love triangle. It explores the relationship between kitsune and humans throughout, with a world inspired by Japanese mythology. Its gameplay is very similar to Super Mario Bros. 3 on the NES, but also with a touch of some elements from Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo. Those two seem to be pretty clearly the main inspirations behind the gameplay, so be prepared for me to reference those throughout this review. But before we really dive into it, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it since it would help me get closer to my goal of 1,000 subscribers. Now to start off, Kitsune Tails puts a really heavy emphasis on its story, with it playing out periodically during dialogue scenes that are properly voice acted. Early on in the first world, it feels like it breaks up the action a bit too much as you sit through a scene after every level. I felt like it hurt the flow out of the gate, but thankfully it's only the very beginning that suffers from this, as dialogue scenes are less frequent and feel more impactful throughout the duration of the game. The story you're told features two kitsune in Yuzu and Kiri, and the local human healer in Ako. There's a bunch of additional characters that are crucial to the plot, but these three are the main characters that the story revolves around. It's honestly really enjoyable and adds a lot to the experience. For some, that might be a positive, and for others, you might just be here for the gameplay. And that's fine. You can easily skip these scenes with the press of a button, but you'll be missing out on some superb voice acting that I didn't expect in a pixel art game. Initially, as I listened to the early scenes, I thought to myself, who is this voice? She sounds so familiar.
It wasn't easy, but I found your flowers, Akko.
Thanks, Yuzu. It's been a while since a cute girl brought me flowers.
So I checked the credits, and yep, the voice of Yuzu is certainly one I'm familiar with. It's the voice of the very talented Kira Buckland. She voices a ton of different characters, but she's most recognizable to me as the voice of Kyoko from the River City Girls franchise. All of the voice acting across the board is really good, and it makes the emphasis on telling an elaborate story that much more enjoyable.
I didn't think you liked human festivals, Kiri. Are you here for the fish-shaped pastries?
No.
The last two things I briefly want to mention are that the art and sound design are both top-notch. The art is really appealing and colorful, nothing looks weird or out of place with the way everything is drawn, and the music is pretty catchy across the board. I don't know that any of it is on the level of me wanting to listen to it outside of playing the game, but it's all really good, and each track suits the environment or level that it plays during. And if you're a stickler for authentically retro graphics, there's a CRT filter for you to toggle on to replicate that era of gaming. That brings us to the gameplay. Well, I'm sure you can already tell at this point, but it's pretty close to what you've experienced before in Super Mario Bros. 3. That's not by any means a knock on Kitsune Tails, it's actually more of a compliment. They've managed to properly mimic the same momentum-based feel here. Each of the worlds feels unique from one another with different designs, enemies, hazards, and suits you're likely to use throughout your journey. You have an inventory system which allows you to use one-time use items throughout your journey. Exactly how this behaves greatly depends on your difficulty chosen though, and you can change this during gameplay so you aren't locked to the one you choose at the start. The easy difficulty is more forgiving and allows items to be used during levels. The normal difficulty allows item use during levels, but only allows you to start from checkpoints if you die, and the hard difficulty only lets you use items from the overworld map. Kitsune Tails is a fairly difficult game, especially later on when the difficulty starts to spike and feel inconsistent. You're free to try as many times as it takes, since there's no lives you have to worry about, and if you happen to really hit a roadblock, you can always try using a specific suit to assist you. These can be earned through minigame spaces on the overworld or purchased from the shop in the town. The coins collected are your currency to play games in the arcade and purchase items from the aforementioned shop. There's a good amount of variety to the different suits you'll acquire throughout the game as you play through. There's one where you have a spear that you can stick in the wall and you can use it for platforming. There's one where you can double jump. There's a fireball. There's a shark suit that allows you to swim, similar to the frog suit from Super Mario Bros. 3. Each world will introduce you to a new suit, so there is a sense of progression as you proceed through the game. The overworld layout is pretty basic, and there's not any branching paths or anything like that where you can skip levels. It's very linear in that regard. Also, for the basic level-to-level structure, it's pretty similar. Sometimes there are different paths you can take, but ultimately, no matter which exit you take at the end of a stage, you're always going to end up in the same spot. Nothing seemed to be unlockable. There didn't seem to be any secret levels or anything like that, like Super Mario World. There's a wide variety of different enemies you'll fight throughout the game. Some have really familiar patterns, things like a piranha plant-like enemy that pops out of what's essentially a pipe. There's also little armadillo guys that are kind of like Koopa Troopas. There's your basic enemies you can stomp, enemies you can't stomp. There's flying enemies, enemies that throw projectiles. A wide range across the board of enemy designs that kept the combat aspect of it feeling fun throughout. There's a bunch of different boss fights. Each one felt completely different than the last. They're all pretty fun. Some are really easy. Some are pretty difficult. But you can retry them as many times as you want. So even the difficult ones aren't that bad. It might just take you a few tries. Everything I've covered so far is only Act 1, believe it or not. There's a second act, and its content is pretty much a huge spoiler, so I want to give a fair warning in case you want to avoid important story beats being ruined for you. Typically in my reviews, I just dodge spoilers altogether, but since I'd be leaving out half the game if I did that here, I have no choice. So here's your final warning. I have this video timestamped if you want to skip ahead to bypass the spoilers. So here we go. Act 2 will see you assuming the role of Kiri. She plays entirely different than Yuzu did, and at first, the idea of replaying the entire game was not something I was looking forward to, but thankfully, I found the second act to actually be more fun than I thought it would be. That might be because Kiri plays like a cross between Scrooge McDuck and Ryu Hayabusa. Or maybe it's because each world unlocks a new ability for you to pull off, and this aspect of the gameplay made it feel very different from my first go at all of these levels. To earn these new abilities, you'll need to emerge victorious in some new boss fights. It's also pretty enjoyable to get to play out the other side of the story. You already saw Yuzu's side, but what was Kiri doing the whole time you were chasing her? Well, you'll have to play for yourself to find out. I found the Richter Belmont-esque special abilities and focus on melee combat versus just Goomba stomping enemies to be the highlight of Act 2. There was just something satisfying about killing enemies in Act 2 that I had to bypass in Act 1 since you couldn't stomp them. Yeah, take that! And once you roll those end credits, there's still even more for you to overcome. There's some pretty insanely difficult Kaizo-style levels in a bonus world that will absolutely put your skills to the test. So be prepared if you decide to tackle these. Welcome back to those of you that skipped the spoiler section, and let's wrap this up. Kitsune Tails was a very enjoyable platformer. It tells an interesting story that revolves around characters that might honestly alienate some people if they frown upon the concept of them being furries. It features a lot of bonus content like the unlockable arcade games, mods to build your own levels and mini games, and some other things mentioned in my spoilers part of this review. It features some really fun gameplay with fluid and spot-on controls, very difficulty levels to cater to players of all skill levels, and a story I found to be enjoyable, which is backed by exceptional voice acting. My only real complaint is the peaks and valleys within the game balance, with some levels feeling frustratingly difficult, seemingly out of nowhere. Kitsune Tails is a game that's easy for me to recommend, but understand that it's not a walk in the park. If you can't handle the heat, you might need to stay out of the kitchen on this one, as the later levels can be pretty tricky. But for everyone else that enjoys a challenging but mostly fair level of difficulty and likes the idea of a story covering queer relationships, then you should absolutely pick this up. I had a blast with it, and if it looked and sounded fun, then I think you will too. I appreciate you watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and also let me know in the comments if you plan on picking this up, or if you have any questions, and I'll be sure to get back to you. But until next time, have a good one.
In my experience, these things work out eventually. For now, just enjoy yourself. You're only young and single for so long. Sooner or later, you'll find your princess, and then it will be a whole new set of adventures.
I guess. I should really get going. Bye, Mom!
Goodbye, sweetie. I'm sure that we'll talk again in 2 shakes of a tail.